Everybody, welcome to the breakdown. I'm Allison Gill. I am here with the owner of the Substack, the Freedom Academy, Asha Rangappa. And I have to tell you, I reached out to you because you and I have been sort of talking about on social media for a few days now, ever since Tulsi Gabbard showed up in tow at the FBI raid of the Fulton County election offices. We've been kind of putting two and two together. And I spoke to Andy McCabe about this too, because I'm like, am I crazy? Am I being crazy?
Like, am
Right?
I being a conspiracy theorist?
Because this sounds
No.
crazy pants.
It's
And Andy McCabe, one of the most temperate people I know, was like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that probably sums it up. So I wanted to talk to you about this. And I saw you appear on All In with Chris Hayes to talk about this, why Tulsi Gabbard was in tow, and what this could mean for the 2026, possibly 2028 elections. And I just want to give folks a little bit of background on what went down right before January 21st, January 6th, 2021. Because it plays an important role here. Jack Smith laid all this out in his indictments and in his volume 1 of his report. There were multiple conspiracies that Trump tried to use to steal the election in 2020, and they all failed, including his 63 lawsuits looking for fraud. And that led him to send the mob to the Capitol when all else failed. One of those conspiracies that Jack Smith talks about, and the reason it was so important that Merrick Garland was able to get Scott Perry's phone, one of those conspiracies was that Donald Trump, first of all, wanted Bill Barr to send the DOJ to seize voting machines in swing states. And Bill Barr's like, GTFO, can't. Then he wanted to send DHS. And Krebs at CISA and, Miles Taylor was like, no, you don't have the authority to do that. So then he got it into his head that he was going to have the Pentagon send military members to seize the voting machines. And Asha, you'll recall a December 18th, 2020 Oval Office meeting in which Rudy Giuliani was the voice of reason. Rudy Giuliani told Donald Trump, you cannot send the Pentagon to seize voting machines, but he said, unless there's foreign election interference. So then they all got on the foreign election interference train. Mike Flynn and Sidney Powell wrote up an executive order saying that China and bamboo ballots and Italian satellites and Hugo Chavez, all that stuff. So they were trying to develop some sort of foreign election interference so that they could justify the Pentagon seizing voting machines. And when that failed, Donald Trump instructed the DNI at the time, the DNI is now Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI at the time was John Ratcliffe, said, I need you to brief Jeffrey Clark, the, architect of the fraudulent elector scheme, one of them. I need you to brief him on foreign election interference. And they actually sat down in a meeting on January 2nd, 2021. And Ratcliffe told Jeffrey Clark there was no foreign election interference that would be outcome determinative, that would change the results of the election. And the reason we know that is because Merrick Garland got Scott Perry's phone, and Scott Perry and Jeffrey Clark texted each other after that meeting admitting that Ratcliffe said there was no foreign election interference. And so then we get the mob to the Capitol, and the rest, as you know, is history. But there was a huge push to prove some type of foreign election interference so that he could justify sending in the DOD to seize voting machines. Now, tie that together, please, Asha. Tell us what you think Tulsi Gabbard, the new DNI, was doing down there, and how this might tie in to what he attempted to do but was stopped from doing in 2021.
Yeah. So, yes, just to add a couple more points to what you said about 2021, I'm losing track of time now. As a part of those kooky conspiracy theories, the foreign interference conspiracy theories, there was actually a draft executive order. It was never put into effect, but the draft executive order would have directed the Department of Defense to go send the military to seize voting machines. So, I'm sure people know elections in the United States are run by the states. There's no federal control over, elections. DHS, the election infrastructure is critical infrastructure. So what they're kind of looking at when they're using this foreign interference hook. And I don't think that I still don't think this would be legal. Okay, just to be clear. But this is where I think they're trying to get some hook to justify some federal intervention is if it's a national security issue where foreign adversaries are, commandeering our election infrastructure, then there is some way for these agencies to get involved. Now, who is involved in looking at foreign interference and foreign intelligence? Well, there's the CIA. The CIA, looks to see what other countries are doing. But by law, under the National Security Act of 1947, the CIA is prohibited from operating within the United States. They are not allowed to perform security functions in the United States. It would have been, it is already cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs that Tulsi Gabbard was there, but I suspect, and by the way, not Daniel Radcliffe, John Radcliffe.
I said that too. I said it too, John Ratcliffe. I called him that too the other day.
I'm sorry, Daniel. Okay, Harry Potter is not involved in our mess over here. But John Radcliffe is now the director of the CIA. Right? So he may, who knows? They might have tried to rope him in. As far as I can tell, things are sort of not normal, but more normal than other agencies are. So he may have pushed back or something.
He butts heads with Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah. So, but Tulsi is totally on board with this. As, Chris Hayes mentioned when I was on with him, she's also been shut out of stuff. So she's kind of looking to get back in good graces. But to be clear, everyone, the Director of National Intelligence is a coordinating figure among the intelligence agencies, okay? This was a position that was created after 9/11. It has no independent investigative authority. I have literally never heard of the DNI being any way involved in the execution of any kind of criminal search warrant. Even if there's a search warrant that's related to foreign intelligence, it's the FBI's National Security Division that handles that. So, but let's look at what Tulsi Gabbard has done. She let out a report, I guess, this was a few months ago, on the Russian election interference, where she spun it and said that it was, a made up whatever. So she's kind of one of these people who's willing to obviously create narratives that fit whatever this administration wants to do. And this is where, AG, you and our brains were on the same wavelength. This is all happening in the aftermath of the invasion of Venezuela, right? All of a sudden, after we go to Venezuela and drag Maduro back here, Trump is tweeting or whatever, truthing or whatever he does on his site, like 1 or 2 days after, re-upping these conspiracy theories from 5 years ago. He gives an interview to the New York Times where he says he regrets not using that executive order to have the military seize those voting machines. So all of this is coming back up. And as you noted, which was one of the countries that there was a theory of foreign interference?
Venezuela?
Venezuela! I have to be honest, I don't know the details. I know it had to do with Hugo Chavez, or something. But who cares? It's Venezuela. Now, Nicolas Maduro is sitting in a rat-infested jail. And guess what? He's, he knows what's up. He's seen what Ghislaine Maxwell got. So, I don't know. But who's going to, in other words, if they were to get some kind of affidavit from Maduro that's like, I interfered, A, what does he have to lose? B, even if he's lying, who's going to prove it? Even if they could prove it, who would be the one prosecuting it? It would be the Department of Justice. And why does he care? He's in jail anyway. And then, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no downside to any of these people literally making shit up. Now, here's my question to you. I mean, they did go to a judge. This is what I said to Chris on the segment. I mean, they went to like a apparently totally normal judge and presented probable cause. So they did have something, presumably something recent, because this is now like, 5 years later. I don't know. To me, the timing is just too coincidental.
Right, especially with everything popping up. Like you said, I regret not seizing voting machines. And that's my concern. They're going to fabricate something. They're going to get Maduro to confess to stealing the 2020 election so that he can seize voting machines, okay, in a critical midterm election year. And again, all speculation. But it just seems, I don't know, blatantly obvious to me, given all of the foreign election interference they tried to come up with. And then you have to think about all of the people who debunked all that. He has been spending a lot of time trying to discredit. He went and filed an executive order that Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs from
Yes.
CISA are going to have to be investigated. He is discrediting Jack Smith's entire January 6th investigation. And he's the one who has those text messages with Scott Perry and Jeffrey Clark admitting that there was no foreign election interference on January 2nd, days before the insurrection. They're going after, I mean, they're trying to discredit everyone who has, even though this has been investigated a million ways and a million times, and the 63 lawsuits.
And Trump's own intelligence community released an intelligence assessment after the 2020 election, which
going
lays
after Brett
about
for
foreign intelligence interference. And the first point, this is under, this was released after the 2020 election, and I think this is what Chris Krebs was especially in trouble for. But the first bullet point is, we assessed that there was no intrusion into actual voting, actual counting of ballots, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the question here is the game plan here backward looking, forward looking, or both? So the statute of limitations for the crimes that they got the search warrant for has passed. However, I've talked to a couple of federal prosecutors who said, if one of the claims is that, this evidence is being concealed on an ongoing basis, because one of those statutes is about like concealing, like not retaining records properly, et cetera. Like, in other words, if it's an ongoing thing, then it's a conspiracy. Somehow it can extend beyond the statute of limitations. So who knows who they might be trying to get at also, because he's got a whole revenge thing for Fulton County too.
Oh, sure.
And then even short of seizing voting machines, which again, I just don't think he can do, but we're at this point where it's the make me presidency. Like, in other words, who's going to tell him no, and like how do you stop him if he tries to do it? But he could use that just as his justification for requiring a federal military presence, an ICE presence around polling areas, intimidating people, arresting people, accusing them of being spies. I mean, God knows, there are so many, in my Substack post that came out today, I called it the Choose Your Own Adventure presidency, because you can go to 10 different pages of the book and get 10 different outcomes, because at this point it's like the 9/11 phrase, it's a failure of imagination. Like, I can't even come up with all the crazy things that they might be able to do or try to justify. But that's why the foreign interference thing is very problematic, because it creates this whole national security smokescreen, which they've been using for everything. Like, national security has become their fig leaf for being able to do, what they want to do, partly because you get a lot of legal deference for it, partly because that's sort of an exclusive executive branch authority. So they're kind of manipulating that in a lot of different arenas.
Yeah, and the conservative Supreme Court sort of poked Donald Trump about that in their when they ordered the Department of Justice to facilitate the release or the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States. They put in that thing, in words, they said, with due regard and deference owed the executive in foreign affairs. That quote has come up everywhere, whether it's the Venezuelan boat strikes or whether it's deporting people to third countries or whether it's the Abrego case or whatever the Boasberg contempt stuff. They're like, it's national security. You owe me the due regard and deference. That's like, he said that line a million times.
It's due regard and deference, and we don't have to tell you. In other words, we don't have to even show you what our evidence is because it's classified as secret, it's national security, et cetera, et cetera.
Like the agreement with Bukele, in which we sent back MS-13 gang members to him so he could hush them up in exchange for being able to use their Seacoast prison. The last thing I want to talk about is the problem that we face going forward as opposed to looking back with regard to the fabricated foreign election interference that they're going to have. We don't have Bill Barr. We now have Pam Bondi. We don't have Bill Barr to say the DOJ can't seize election machines. We don't have Mark Esper in charge of the Department of Defense. We now have Pete Hegseth. We don't have Chris Krebs at CISA. We don't have Miles Taylor in the White House. We don't have Hirschman, the Pats, right? Pat Cipollone. We don't have Ken Cuccinelli. We don't have the people who were running the DOJ after Barr left, Donahue and Rosen, who said, if you install Jeffrey Clark, you will be in charge of a graveyard. We don't have any of those people anymore in this administration. And as much as I hate to refer to people like Bill Barr and Cuccinelli as the adults in the room, they actually were at that time. Esper, they actually were at that time. And so now, with this motley crew of sycophants,
Can I add in
the
here?
same pushback. Yeah, please.
Can I add in? The only people who weren't adults in the room at that time were Kash Patel and Chris Miller. Kash Patel, who was at the Pentagon as the chief of staff to Chris Miller, who was the acting Secretary of Defense. Chris Miller was willing to call Italy to look into this Italian satellites thing. My point being, the one person who is fully on board and willing to do it is now the director of the FBI.
Yeah, exactly.
So, please carry on. I just wanted to add that in and make sure that Kash Patel's the through line was noted.
I think our saving grace may be that even the conservative Supreme Court justices, or at least the conservative chief of the 11th Circuit, William Pryor, who is a good friend of Clarence Thomas, has said that the executive has no role to play in elections. He said this very clearly in a ruling that was escalated to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals when Mark Meadows wanted to move his Fulton County case to federal court. He's like, first of all, it's not former officials that get this coverage from the DOJ, it's current officials. And second of all, even as the chief of staff who's supposed to do whatever the president says, neither you nor the president have any role in overseeing elections. Those are overseen by the states. And that's a pretty solid, at least for now, position, including with like most of the conservatives on the Supreme Court, at least. I don't know how,
Well, and it also matters for even their own, immunity paradigm, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I know that people are like, whatever, it doesn't matter anymore. But I mean, I still, I think it's important to, at least if you're taking it face value, if there is no Article 2 authority over elections, then anything he tries to do is outside the scope of anything that he would plausibly have immunity for. Maybe one day we will be in a place where that matters. And I just think it's worth kind of noting that it's, in other words, we talk about, he kind of can do anything in a lot of ways because, he's using his Justice Department. But I just want to point out that technically speaking, that would come outside of that umbrella.
Official duties, right. And that is the other reason he wants this to be a national security issue.
Yes.
Is
100%.
because he feels since the Supreme Court made that little note, due deference in regard to the executive and national foreign affairs or whatever, maybe that's his foot in the door to control or have some sort of impact on election oversight where he would not normally have.
And to bring it in under his executive branch authority and so
Article 2.
Colorable way.
Article 2, faithfully execute the laws. He tried to argue that. Jack Smith was like, TTFO, bro, that's not your law to execute. These are state laws. Anyway, thank you so much for breaking that down. Now, people might be like, what can we do? We can do what we always do. Get out the vote, go vote as much as you can, vote. This is probably largely going to be in the hands of legal experts like Mark Elias on Democracy Docket and the lawyers for the party, the Democratic Party, or national security counselors like nonprofits and legal. This is probably going to be in the hands of lawyers for when and if he tries to do something like this. It'll probably end up being them that has something to do in this matter. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I will just also add that as with January 6th, all of these operations require kind of an information warfare component, which is they seed it through a narrative, right? So part of this is going to be like creating some basis. I skeeted this on Blue Sky. If you scroll down a few posts, you'll see it. I actually posted a link to that 2020 intelligence assessment, which states very clearly from Trump's own intelligence community that there was no interference. I think pre-bunking in this situation is worthwhile. In
Yeah.
other words, in amplifying and spreading that the conclusion of the intelligence community is that there was no intrusion or alteration of actual votes. So get a hold of it, download it before it disappears on the DNI website. And make sure you share it. We all have social media platforms, and it's up to us to not only go vote and be engaged, with our bodies and our minds, but also to make sure that we're using these platforms and social media channels that we have to amplify the truth, because it makes it harder for these false narratives to gain traction.
Yeah. And I think something else that we can probably do, I know we can definitely do that probably might help, is to contact our state attorneys general, contact our secretary of state, our state registrar, and our local election offices to ask them what their plan is in the event of ICE being told that they have to come to our polls, or in the event that Donald Trump sends the Pentagon keg Seth after he's done doing his very poor form pull-ups to come and seize voting
And
machines. Like,
kettlebell swings.
oh,
Did
don't.
you see the kettlebell swings?
Why did you make me remember that?
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was a buzzkill. Yeah.
It's like when my dog used to wipe his butt on the carpet, like dragging his butt across. Anyway. Yeah. But, call your local election officials, call your registrar, call your state attorneys general. Say, hey, do you have a plan in place? You should have a plan in place. And you might feel like you sound a little nuts saying that you're worried about the security of our elections in your state or in your municipality where you are. But I don't think that you can tell them that Asha and Allison and Andy McCabe, former deputy director of the FBI, says that you're not.
Yeah. And I felt crazy, like trying to understand, this whole rabbit hole. And I was like, I can't believe we might actually be here. But
Yeah, there's a non-zero chance that Maduro could be confessing to stealing the 2020 election for Joe Biden.
correct. Correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Everybody make sure you subscribe to the Freedom Academy by Asha Rangappa. If you have the ability to subscribe to the Breakdown, my Substack as well, I would love that. Tell everyone else where they can find and follow you.
I am on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram, though I mainly post like personal stuff there, but you can follow me there. But really, my Substack is where I post most of my stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Everybody, thanks for being here on this Saturday afternoon, taking some time off from your weekend to join us. We really appreciate it. Thanks for watching The Breakdown. We'll see you next time.
Bye.